Hello, and welcome to a new episode of Everstage's Go-to-Master Show, where we converse with RevOps and go-to-market leaders from some of the most successful companies today and learn from their unique stories. Joining us today is Christopher Goff, Senior Director of Sales Compensation at Labcorp. Chris, thanks for joining us today. It's a pleasure to have you.
Thank you for having me.
Excellent. Why don't we get started? Just if you tell our listeners a little bit about yourself, your trajectory, and what brings you to this chair today.
Well, first off, thanks for having me. Appreciate the opportunity. It's a little bit about me. I like to say that I grew up in sales operations. So that started with quotas and territories and market analysis, reporting and analytics, determining determining all of the things behind the scenes. I quickly fell into sales comp more formally because my manager left 3 months into the job, and so there's a lot of that just natural. You figure out what you have to figure out. Fast forward doing it for a decade. I manage a team. Then I started to actually learn some of the formality associated with that. Right over time, you kind of do the on the job, and then you learn how to actually do things maybe more appropriately. But um, I shifted into broad based comp soon thereafter, and managed all compensation programs for that same company for a number of years before I moved into the sales comp role I have today. And so I like to think that I can bridge the language barrier between HR and sales, and give a little bit of a different perspective to sales compensation than a lot of my other brethren.
Yeah, totally. And I think you're coming up through the sales ops cohort. It's a really valuable just skill. So you're kind of forced to deal firsthand with a lot of the data, understanding how the business ticks, especially when you get into territories and quotas. Like all of that is, yeah, there's some analysis and data side to it, but it's all really connected to what does the business want to do and what are those levers you have to play, and all of those things just completely roll up into comp fully. So that's a really good path for that. Just curious because many of us, my trajectory is actually kind of similar. I did a lot of sales ops before going into comp. Um, how did you first get into the operations role? Did you fell into it? Were you starting in sales? And just what's that origin story for
So I got my master's degree in economics
you? Hmm.
and thought I was going to go into public policy, and I started working as a statistician for the state of North Carolina, and realized that was not a great place to sort of kickstart a career, at least not for me. And quickly applied to as many different type of sort of analyst jobs as possible. Just like, okay, well, I know data. I knew enough to be dangerous in terms of analysis, and I learned how to translate the data part into some form of communication. And that's where I landed in that sales ops type of role, because the emphasis, most of that early work was really look at a variety of different data sets, see if there's relationships, see if there's something that we can learn about market sizing or the drawing of the map. So I did like manual maps, right, back then. And I used a little tool called Map Point for anyone that may know this. It was a very early version of like a Microsoft product. I'm not even sure what it evolved to, candidly, but it was the all of the work related to the data behind the scenes that led me into just naturally like asking more questions and getting exposure to meetings and conversations about how do we optimize the sales, whether that's coverage, whether that's execution, and all of those things. That path took me to working for sales, sales operations, finance, HR, along the way, right? Mostly doing the same thing, but it was all dependent on whose point of view. Much of the commercial, or the power in the organization translated into.
I see. Yeah, again, so really good background, your economics background, understanding data, totally relevant. So as you fell into your sales operations role, I guess now probably more called revops, especially starting on your career, you probably would have been exposed to it. And you mentioned a lot of different elements like the quotas and territories, and they're all sort of disciplines on their own. We have a lot of customers and people we talk to that are in smaller companies starting their careers. They get to exposure to everything, and you have a tendency to want to say yes to everything. And there's things you can do. Curious if you have any advice from your experience and how do we decide what to tackle, what to send someone else, what to just say no to as you evolve your career.
Well, I would say that when um and this would be a little bit maybe career advice as well, but there when you are new to many things, the best thing you could do is say yes where possible to figure out things that you don't know. And it's okay to not know things, and it's better to have the opportunity to or grace that comes with someone asking you something rather than something being thrust upon you later. And I think there were phases of my career where it made more sense for me to just jump into something, because if I had pushed against it, it would have not worked out well for me. So prime example, Salesforce. Um, where not that there weren't CRMs way back in the day, but the first exposure to Salesforce involved like myself and other people of my level being just naturally selected as admin type of work, right? Because it's all involved data cleanup, figuring out how to do all of the things. Because when it's a new CRM, especially at a smaller organization, you're trying to figure out everything you have to figure out, and you're changing the wheels on the bus as it's going 50 miles an hour, and having those sorts of real life experiences are going to be far more meaningful for you in the future when you may have a different vantage point, your point of view, as you progress in your career, you'll have that frame of reference, and you'll be able to either get ahead of that or change the tone of the experience for the other people who are going to be sitting in that seat. And that's why I just give like my Salesforce experience as one of those sorts of things. I didn't know what I was signing up for. And well, candidly, neither did anyone else. But we were implementing it. So then you figured what you had to figure out, right? It's one of those prime examples that if I had chosen to not allow um, things to happen, and I think this is true for like AI. For a lot of people, the same thing. Is it better to just embrace the unknown? The answer is yes, because you don't know what position that'll put you in later.
Yeah, that's a really good analogy because I remember the days when Salesforce was the brand new shiny toy. Very few people knew what they were doing, and you just had to go in, run with it, and yeah, ton of learning, and yeah, it opened up a bunch of doors for a lot of people, even if they didn't think that was something they were into. So yeah, I like the comparison with AI for that, sure. And just taking away earlier, I'm hearing just earlier in your career, maybe say yes to more stuff that you think you should figure it out, and there's always work to be done, and just find what you want to keep, what you can delegate or pass on, but just don't pass on the opportunity to learn early on. That sounds very
Yeah.
sound. All right.
Yeah, and I think
So
when you get old, when you may get more curmudgeoned in your later career, you can kind of say you could probably get away with saying no
yeah,
more often, and maybe you don't even feel like you have the luxury of saying no early in your career, but also find out that every sort of um, every chance to say yes is simply an opportunity to gain exposure to a new avenue of what that future may translate it to.
Totally. Yeah. So now fast forwarding to today, decades after you've had a ton of experience, you're running a large comp operation for a global company with what 35 countries, if I read that correctly, you're operating in or plans for. Yeah. Anyways, a lot. Tell us a little bit about that. How do you, obviously, we're all striving every year to keep plans simple, keep the architecture consistent, if roles are comparable, but there's inevitable localization that we need to do for different regions. How do you handle with it? Do you have a secret sauce you can share with us about how to rationalize this multi-region world?
Well, I would say a lot of it starts with strategy and alignment to philosophy, and from that point, and that is, let's say you have the luxury of a um somewhat universal commercial strategy where you can kind of say this is our approach, this is the way we do business. Well, to a certain extent that helps immensely for being able to land at some consistency, whether that's design, whether that's terminology, whether that is a overarching, let's say, core skeleton of process, or a plan document, or something like that, right? What I tend to say is that you want to, wherever possible, uh, try towards consistency and have a skeleton of that. And when you're layering on differences, and there should be some differences, whether that's level of pay, whether that's pay mix, whether that's particular types of measures, culturally, different inclinations towards individual versus team, nuances of coverage, etc. That the thing that is good to be able to revert back to is what you can control from a consistency perspective is something that you just get everybody on the same page on. That you ask this on a regular basis, whether that's just your annual review or what have you, is that, is everybody still comfortable with this, right? This being the thing. So like in my world, a lot of that is a predominance of the terms and conditions of the plan document, as an example. That's a big component. If everybody can kind of live with one way of having the bulk of the language, so we don't have independent local legal reviews associated with all of the things, right? Wherever, if however possible, and we have lots of different plan templates, we have various, changes in coverage, but I try to at least have one path, right? Of here's the consistency, here's the thing that we can all agree to, right? Everybody comfortable with this. And broadly speaking, we also have relatively similar design elements. So it's an opportunity to kind of go to the library, as it were, and say, can we all agree to use these things, right? And the balance, the different weightings. You may select different types of measures, but it's not anything where you're going outside of the library. We're all agreeing to use these types of things, which have corresponding language, which have corresponding crediting methodology and implications for reporting and all that sort of stuff. So to a certain extent, it is trying to define the universe in consistent measures, and then what it is, let's say the meat on the skeleton, may just vary a little bit by role or country, but it's not anything that we have to feel like it's a custom sort of
I see.
experience every single time there's something new. It's go to the library, see what it is that we can pull from, and does that work? Is that a new job? Even for like new jobs, how different is this than the ways in which we cover the market today? The different types of performance measures, the payment timing, the pay curve, all of those things, right? So that's what I try towards to lean to, is the what can I control and how can we sort of use the variables in the equation similarly to make it so that we can absorb and be adaptive when we need to be.
Yep, that makes a ton of sense. Curious, two follow-up questions. In terms of your commercial strategy globally, do you see a lot of regional differences, or is it mostly a similar type of model but with small fluctuations? Because that might impact how different your plans need to be. And maybe, sorry, I'm going to get green. Does that change year on year? Do you see regions making experiments in this sense and then trying something different? Or is it mostly a more mature business where things are kind of worked out?
So it's an excellent question, and I will go through my experience here and not as much of like the what we do now
Mhm.
sort of sentiment. But when I think of pockets of businesses and products, I do believe it's really important to know, let's say, the life cycle of the portfolio item that the sales team is focused on. And you may, in a single company, have various points of maturity, growth, launch, decline, etc. And what I tend to think that it actually lines up pretty well if there's self-awareness of that phase of growth, that it ends up lining more to that than it does geography. And that's just because what I have seen anyways is in most cases there is, let's say, a preference to geographic regional alignment. So, like Asia Pac, there may be nuances to some aspects of let's say comp, in China to Japan to Korea, but generally speaking, the functional aspects of the sales execution don't there's not a desire to want to have multiple flavors of that. Where it's different is when people are selling different things to different segments or different customers. Those are the things that then have different mechanics of the comp plan. And so as soon as you layer in different people selling different things, that's where you'll have, is that an incorporation of selling multiple portfolio items or separate sales teams that are selling different items. That's where you tend to have that deviation. And it does change regularly because the maturity will shift over time. And so my experience in the past has been very much the same way. As I might have a small team that rapidly becomes a big team. And the that team that once existed this way, right? That we designed an incentive for even last year and the year before is wildly different. And so we have to be constantly adapted to that because we were actually super successful. And I've also seen it in the inverse, a declining market. And what are we going to do with that? Usually it's redrawing priority and focus, right? Shifting away from net new, if net new dried up, to retention and maintenance type of job responsibilities. So a lot of it's also evolution of the sales role itself.
Yeah, that resonates. And my experience is similar. And I think you keyed on something important. It's even if your main worldview is geographic, if there's segments, you might need to validate where those things don't match anymore and recognize that there might be a region that is maybe immature for your flagship type product, but this new thing you come up or this acquisition you make is actually really primed to be successful in that market. So just tune to that, make it explicit. And also, you made a good point on the declining thing. No one wants to necessarily go out and say in a board meeting that this product is on their way out. But if you know it is, you might as well just act as it is, do the right things, harvest it, and not pretend it's something it's not at the cost of maybe definitely sellers' income, morale, or performance when it's avoidable. Just be upfront, make it explicit, and then deal with it as it is.
Yeah, it is far better to repurpose those salespeople to other functions if it's a sinking ship. Because, like most organizations, if they're a really good seller, you prefer to have them do other things than just have them leave. right? Far more difficult to replace that talent.
Totally. So great segue into the next topic I wanted to chat with you about, which is just overall motivation. Obviously, sales incentives, it's all about driving their teams to do the things the company wants them to do. We care a lot about that, and there's a lot of studies about what makes people tick. But I know you've talked about before how while cash is still incredibly important and people really care about, there's also a lot of other ways to motivate people that are long lasting and that are should be part of our tool set as comp people. So maybe talk a little bit about some of the other things you do and how have you find them useful in real life examples if you have them?
Yeah. So I am a student of economics. I do believe people respond to incentives, but I'm also a student of human psychology, and there are things to uh, help us understand how what are the things that help people want to act. And that's ultimately what we have a variable pay plan for, is to change behavior, to change the input so that the organization has better outputs, have better outcomes. And while cash is the sort of highest level of expectation for a seller, the things, in my opinion, that I think are that we don't do as good of a job with are somewhat more intangible. The concept of recognition goes a really, really long way. And that's something that I think is naturally it's it's harder, right? I think a lot of people, I'll say, I think there's in my past, I think there's been a lot of sales leadership that's been guilty of this, is managing through the money rather than managing through clarity of function, better coaching, identifying points of execution, ensuring that there's greater awareness, but also points like the concept of recognize and define what good work looks like and what success means. And those I think are points that are needed in order for there to be candidly a successful sales incentive program as well as a successful seller. Now, one of the things that I remember from early in my career, and I think this is the benefit of a small organization in many cases, is every Friday there was a blinking light on my phone, and the sales leaders would leave messages for everyone in the company on all of the wins. And they would call out all of the people that won the big deal. They talk about the whole team because it takes a community to close a deal, right? And they would talk, it would be a great opportunity for them to call out the seller, of course, but also all of the participants, all of the people in sales ops. I was in sales ops back in the day. All of the contract admin, the even legal, and anybody who came in, and like all this good stuff. And it felt made you feel good as an employee, even if you weren't in sales, but also was something that was a genuine opportunity that I remember 20 years later. That was a distinct moment of recognition that served a very clear purpose of reinforcing this is what good looks like. Go do more of it, and it didn't cost anyone a dime to do, but it was a meaningful point of engagement with the employee population.
Yeah. I think especially the unsung heroes of the back office, the sales ops define as the deal desk people really love that. It just reminded me an anecdote. We had a couple jobs ago, had to migrate from Slack to Teams just because the more advantageous contracting for Microsoft. It was the right thing to do for the business. A lot of work went into changing everything. And Teams was different, and some people liked some things, others didn't. But overall, we were trotting along, except for the sales org. The sales force was just very resistant, completely resistant to Teams. And it was strange because there was no, we didn't really understand. And it came down to the ability to celebrate wins as a group and teams for some reason was not as good as what they used to doing on Slack. So they cared more about the fact that they could blast out the win and everyone commenting and the real time thing. And that died the minute we went to teams for whatever reason.
Mm,
And that was more important than the actual, I mean, you think about Slack or Teams as collaboration tools to win more deals, to get all of that, of course, mattered. But what really hurt was not being able to get that recognition. Um, so that's an example of how important that can be, for sure. Um, Interesting. I fully agree. And as this whole recognition area, as comp admins, as comp RevOps people, we have a role to play, but it's also a cultural thing across the company, right? It's not just up to the team to do it. And I think with your background on total compensation and HR, you probably have a better view than others into how to get that done. Um, Curious if there's any anecdote stories, tips on how do you get that if, let's say, you're in a place where that doesn't really exist. How do you start moving the needle culturally to have more of a celebration culture? Is it even possible? It's just
yeah, yeah. I think so. I have launched recognition programs previously, prior employer, and a lot of it does come from change management. And what I mean there is starting somewhere and doing more of it. And that is one of the most one of the most memorable things. And I think there's two different examples related to sales leaders. One of them, when my grandmother passed away, I got a handwritten note from the sales leader. He'd been there like 30 some odd years, right? I distinctly remember getting a handwritten note. And the act of acknowledging is what I would consider recognition, because it's acknowledging a moment in somebody else's life. Whatever the moment is, it is adding more emphasis than what is required to someone else's plane of existence, whatever it is you want to call it, right? A written note goes a long way. The other thing that I remember early in my career is the he was like the number 3 in the company. He was like an executive vice president and head of services, sales, and other things. His name was Mike. Um, One day, he literally went around to every single cube and said thank you to all of us really low-level people. And that was the first time that I actually ever remember someone saying thank you at work. That was a cultural shift, entirely a dynamic experience that doesn't require the level, but has a meaningful impact that people will never forget. And so you can start anywhere and do anything that can be meaningful so that you leave an experience in other some in someone else's life. And I think a really good leader, regardless if it's sales or not, can do that.
yeah, love it. It's acknowledging a moment in a human life. I also like that's something that AI will probably never be able to do. The handwritten note, not because they can't handle pens, but if there's no human behind it, like the emotion of getting it is it's just not the same, right? It's not a if then send the thanks note. That means nothing versus a human taking time from their busy day to come talk to you. That's a whole other experience. So very, very good. Um, yeah, so start small, do something. Maybe I'll add something, just make it be authentic. It just has, even if it's small, organic is better than try to come up with this big thing and then people see through that. So it's better to be small and authentic than try to go overboard and have it
Yes, do
smell
do the
off.
things that you can control, do them
Mhm.
well, and then if you can, scale it.
Excellent. All right. Let's talk a little bit about change. This is a constant in our industry. It's really ever, always has been. Maybe things are accelerating a little bit now, but I don't remember a time where running any sorts of revops or sales ops operation or team. There was not some transformation project going on either, from perpetual to subscription, for on-prem to SaaS, from legacy to Salesforce, from usage based. Like there's always something
Mhm,
going on.
mhm.
We're used to it. Um, any lessons from the field on what of those things do you want to sort of automate, delegate versus things that you think as a leader you might need to be very close to, and let's call it hands-on treatment for specific projects. And I'm thinking of you now as a leader of leaders, as just managing a bigger team. What should have your attention versus maybe trying to delegate a bit more?
And let me add a little bit of flavor to this as well, because I remember in changing jobs, the wild difference in the cultural sentiment and the cultural tendencies of speed of change. And one of the things where I one of the examples of a previous company I worked for was we moved really, really fast and our bias was towards action. Changing jobs, the bias was more towards, let's watch this and see before we change things. And my how I defined sort of success for myself was the execution of of these things. And I had a little bit of um sort of misalignment. There's a little bit of disgruntled sentiment that I had because I have all these great ideas. I want to implement change because my mindset, my cultural sentiments, tendencies were to move faster than the org. And the org wasn't interested in moving that fast because they didn't have those sentiments. So one of the things that I would make sure to that everybody do is sort of gauge gauge your organization first. Don't think that you have to do more than you have to do, but align to whatever it is the flavor is at your organization. That's an important thing. And that's cultural tendencies. What are the you have a bias towards action. Do you have a tendency to like some of my more recent experiences? It's more of a wait, see, pay attention to, learn, right? And if you're in like a engineering organization, you're going to do a very, very technical study before you make a change, as an example, right? And that's just an important part of being adaptive to the environment. So your success is really a function of the who you work for culturally and their temperature, if you will, right? Like how fast do they want to move? How do they act? It's not you, it's them. Because ultimately, you support and you derive and I, I use this analogy, I think it was a couple months ago, is you're like a speech writer. You are doing all of this stuff behind the scenes to help the business have their message that they're going to deliver. So everything that we're doing from a incentive design perspective, a commercial support perspective, is so that the leader can run with that message to the sellers. It's not our message, it's their message. And we're going to be the ones who support the development of all of the things so that that gets executed effectively. In fact, you may even write the speech, right? And then they deliver it, but it's their message. And so when I think about like myself and my progression in career and even like from an analyst to a leader of leaders type of sentiment, what I have found that my success is really a function of the place I am in supporting that organization at that moment in time. And that evolved, and it evolved from being the one doing a lot of the technical work to the person who does much more of the soft skill type of work. I have to run a lot of meetings. I have to work through points of negotiation. I have to emphasize what I think is the right action, but ultimately it's the business's decision, right? And not get too twisted over that. Don't get caught up in the things that aren't yours to get frustrated with, right? And so some of it is also greater clarity and self-awareness on your function and what you can do for the organization versus what you might aspire or want to do for the organization. So I would say a lot of it is that the things that I delegate end up being more of the technical work. And what I hold on to are the things that require multiple layers or levels of buy-in in the realm of having that technical work come to light or be effectively utilized in the organization.
Yeah, that makes sense. So again, more on the human element alignment, but underlying the point about um, fitting in the right place in the organization, understanding the role as a support role. We're not necessarily here to change the world if the company's not ready for it. It's going to be a futile battle. So that's super interesting. And yeah, sometimes you have to disagree, but commit to moving on. Right? You have a discussion. There's a decision made, recorded. It might not be what you thought was going to happen, but then you just move on from that. And otherwise, you just go crazy trying to relive all those discussions and just or worse, try to swim upriver with things that are never going to work. So that's good guidance for
It
people.
won't help you cope in
It won't.
your success or failures if you can't come to some terms of it's okay to let certain things go. Right?
Yeah,
Sometimes there's just battles that aren't yours, so you don't have to carry them.
totally. So just obviously it's 2025. We have to talk about AI at some point.
Of
So
course.
let's talk about it now. Your perception. How are you personally using it? Maybe how does it land in this um, matrix of things you care about? Is it tactical? Is it how do you engage with it?
Yeah.
And yeah, any wins personally seeing already?
Yeah. I see sales compensation as an art and a science. And what I see AI's role is in the science part. So there are the capabilities of doing the data analysis, writing initial drafts of plan language, setting up quotas, mapping territories, optimizing statistical analysis, and even providing visuals for presentations, helping with initial aspects of rollout communication, et cetera, et cetera. Like all of the things related to the work. But what I don't see AI is the art part, the art requirement, which at least at the moment is still a human having to connect to another human to gain buy-in, to socialize and gain trust, to communicate expectations and all of those things that are required, which may be phone calls, maybe presentations, maybe sitting in front of another human being, catching their body language, being adaptive in your method of communication or your style. All of those things until we have like robotic versus robot, right? There's going to be that human element that I would call that more of the art and the on the fly adaptation that is required in terms of incentive design. All of those things I think are not an AI probably the next many years sort of phase. But I do think a lot of things where rules can be written and logic can be followed, there are ways in which AI can support us in really doing all of the what I would deem to be lower value components of work so that it gives the opportunity for everyone to focus more and more of their time on the higher levels of work which do involve human interaction.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. There's a lot of not necessarily low value, but tedious. I guess the process is boring. The outcome could be very valuable. And that's a good spot for like benchmarking, anything that's just consuming data, understanding performance. We talked a little bit earlier about are the plans working? How do you know what to tweak? A lot of that is just embedded in the data, but it's just kind of if you have to do that deliberately, it can be complicated, but it's a good place to be. We find a lot of success with modeling through AI, things that weren't modeled before, just because they were hard to model, because it wasn't a good idea to do it, but it's easier to do it now. Um, yeah, and communication rollout, yeah, to some extent, definitely. But you also trust it's a very human to human connection.
Yeah.
You're
And it's
dealing
not
with
like
people
AI
5
has
minutes.
that all worked out yet either, right?
No. Excellent. Yeah. All right. So most companies have a fiscal calendar year close together. We're wrapping up the year. We're thinking about next year's plans. Hopefully, well on the path of having that. Do you have a specific checklist of things as you're working through next year's plans? Any lessons from 2025 that you want to take forward into the new year? Of course, things that you think might be applicable to a broader audience.
I would say I don't have the, like, here is, catch the attachment, here's my checklist type of thing, but what I do always try to very deliberately, intentionally do is ask all of the decision makers, what is it that is lacking? What is it that has changed in the business? And if they believe or feel that the plan as it exists today can sort of survive to support that initiative, whatever that looks like. And I try to ask as many people as possible so that there's an opportunity to just first off give people a voice, because there's a certain amount of people that just want to be heard, but they may not really have a seat at the table. But also ask from a variety of points of view and people that look at things in a different way. So then that gives me more understanding of better questions I can ask the other people that I do perceive as the primary decision makers, and bring up things that are, like, hey, so what about this? I hear this is happening. Does are we in a place to be adapted to that, right? Especially when there's significant things that may not be in your sort of day-to-day exposure. Some of this also just stems from being a better student of your business. A lot of in my personal opinion, one of the best things you can do is understand what your company does. What do you sell? How do you sell it? What's your market? What are the challenges, so that you can have a more educated conversation with your executives and with your sales leadership, so that you can, even if you got to pretend a little bit, right? Even if it's a little light on the knowledge part, you can at least ask some educated questions and hear occasionally, which is always nice. But that's a really good question, because we're not entirely sure how we're gonna adapt to that or change that. And ideally, you have to act like a consultant. You have to ask really, really good questions of the business to find out if they're thinking anything in particular, or that keeps them up at night. What are we going to do? How are we going to be responsive to this initiative or that problem or this competitive situation? Ideally, we want to build those anticipated adaptations into our plan or our strategy for execution, so that we're either, some of these things like, okay, well, let's make this change now, let's wait and see on this other thing because it all depends on this other maybe happening. And what I find is I'm just focusing on trying to get a really good handle on whatever movement of the business is happening. That's where I like to spend a lot of my time.
Yeah. Yeah, that's it's valuable, and it might be counter to I've been in place and I know people in comp that are, let's accept it, sometimes too busy, very shell shocked. It's just that, and their instinct is maybe to try to keep everything as together as possible, and they don't want to go out and just open up, lift rocks, and see what nasty things might be under there. And then, what if I go talk to someone? They might suggest something, and yeah, they probably will, but
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
their job to do that, right? So, um,
It's funny, but it's very true. I don't wanna ask questions because then somebody's gonna say, "I gotta change stuff," which means I gotta go write some new code, I gotta go and implement something different, so it's gonna be a lot more work for me, you know? Yeah,
totally.
that's the gig. I
That
think
is the
people
gig.
do forget that.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And that's where success lies. And of course, better tools, more modern systems help you make changes easier, and you should lean on those definitely. And again, modeling with AI is super useful. But yeah, it's a great takeaway. Even if you have your own data set, you've hopefully throughout the year done some measures, understanding how the plan has been successful or not based on the initial assumptions. No substitute for talking to people, multiple levels. I like your approach of starting maybe lower level and then going up the chain and just getting different perspectives. Also, you're not going to have that one big, strong personality at the very top that might cloud everything because there's the first person you talked to, and then that becomes the mantra without it necessarily being the only approach or the right approach. So, very good takeaway. Beats a checklist of to do. So thanks for that insight. That's great. Wrapping up, last question we always ask for guests is just any advice they have for people starting up in their career, whether it be resources, books, podcasts, just general life advice. We've been around the block a few times. What do you want to share with our audience that you think might be good for them to hear at this point?
General life advice. I would say you're. I would say if we're getting general life advice, so let me start here. Is you're already enough. You don't have to be anything that you're not. Right? So let me just. I gotta say that, right? But then I also think it is important if there's a trajectory that you desire for the evolution of your career. I tend to believe that it's not in the technical tasks and skills that you acquire. It is from a place of acquiring soft skills. The the and and this is like again like with AI, learning how to write a prompt is meaningful. But funny enough, AI will teach you how to write a prompt to ask AI for a response. You don't have to know how to do that. It will come and it'll be easier over time. But talking to another human being in a meaningful and significant way goes a lot further in the humans that will likely be the ones that employ you as you continue to still to be employed in your career. And so I think skills of just broad communication, but like negotiation, and trust development are are paramount. So this is like developing your credibility, having trust with those other, so relationship management, and negotiation are big. One of my favorite books is Never Split the Difference by Chris Voss. That's a good one. And there's dozens of other ones. Anyone can ping me if you want some reading options. But that's one that when I think of the negotiation skill that is involved very heavily, in my opinion, in sales comp, that's a good one to um, definitely listen to and take some action points from it.
Excellent. Yeah, soft skills, huge, hugely important. And the higher up you go in your career, the more you rely on them. They're helpful forever, not just in a work setting. Well worth investing on that. And there's a ton of resources now. There's YouTube, there's masterclass, there's you mentioned Chris Voss's got one. It's just brushing up on that, work on our humanness. Um, double down on that seems to be a really smart thing to do. Amazing. Well, really thank you for being here. Enjoy the conversation. This has been great, and I'm sure our audience will eat this up.
Thank you.
All right. Well, that brings us to the end of this insightful episode of Go to Masters. Big thanks again for Chris for sharing his experiences and valuable insights. Remember, you can tune in every week to learn more from game changers driving hypergrowth companies across the globe. My name is Jose Aleman. I'm your host, signing off for today. And remember, Go to Masters is brought to you by Everstage, your trusted partner for transforming the way businesses handle sales compensation.